Our entire mission, Agility Robotics, is to enable humans to be more human. The whole point is to have robots take the drudgery out of a lot of tasks. We're kind of at this really exciting inflection point in robotics. Now, having robots that can do things in human environments is going to enable so much more utility out of these machines.
In your robot in training and operation, one was from Canada, the Trusted Positioning Inc., and their interest was in enabling robot location positioning in indoor environments, which could be GNSS denied. We also had TDK Lambda, which is a company that looks into power electronics and power systems. We also have had deep discussions with TDK Inventions, which is our sensor company on the IMU use cases.
Right.
Just wanted to have your opinion on the synergy, some of which could be in the immediate future, some of which could be more longer term.
Yep.
And how do you see this bringing value to agility?
We're building this robot, this human-centric robot, to go into human environments. And that's really different from the paradigm of how robotics has been done before, which is in structured environments for the robots. So we have a lot of degrees of freedom, a lot of motors and encoders and sensors throughout the robot, a lot of complexity, and it needs a lot of perception to be able to get around in this completely unstructured world and unstructured environment. That's where we're going, right? And part of the challenge, of course, of doing this is there isn't yet an ecosystem of all the different kind of sensors at the right scale and then the right cost and the right specifications to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so being able to grow that together, I think, is the most useful thing. You know, we meet with each of these business groups and we figure out, okay, first, what's the catalog of products that you've got? And then we kind of look at what are the catalog of requirements and needs that we have and see if we find a fit now and can start some of those things early. And we've done that like with the IMU, with the InventSense IMU. So we've got now placed on our circuit boards distributed throughout the whole robot to bring back just very rich information about the orientation and the 6-axis acceleration of every joint on the robot. And using some of these new machine learning techniques can actually make sense of some of that data. And so that's going to kind of start that ball rolling of what is the most useful kind of information to come through and how can we improve on this in the future. We like to share, hey, here's actually what we want, here's the thing that we need. And I hope that that's also really useful to TDK and then down the road useful to us as we kind of evolve together some of the match between the products and then the needs.
So as you scale your number of robots, do you see this as de-risking some of your product development?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting now with, a few hundred robots over the next year or two. But our factory is set up to produce 10,000 robots a year. And that's just the beginning. The market size for these human-centric, multi-purpose robots to be, even just in logistics, is hundreds of billions. And then you grow that into the adjacent use cases in warehousing, manufacturing, and then retail and medical and construction and energy and eventually even to consumer products in the home. Robots like this are going to be a part of everyday life like cars and smartphones. And that's coming.
Yes.
So we got to figure out how to make that be affordable and effective and useful.
Good morning, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Could you introduce yourself and your company?
Yeah, good morning, Geeta. I'm Chris Goodall. I'm the president of Trusted Positioning Inc., which is a TDK group company. I was a co-founder of Trusted Positioning before we became part of TDK, and now we are a software division of TDK.
As someone who has been through this journey as a startup founder and one that was later acquired by a large corporation, tell us how you see collaborations between portfolio companies and large corporations bring value to both the corporation and the startups.
I think the collaboration comes from really the differences in the companies, right? And where they're coming from, but not always where they're going. A lot of times they're going in the same directions, but where they're coming from is very different. Very different worlds. Running a startup company from the ground up, trying to create energy out of nothing, so to speak, is quite difficult. But also in a big company, trying to change and disrupt is very difficult. So I think that's where the two companies can really help each other and benefit from each other as long as they're working both in the same direction.
How does working with a startup help a mothership like TDK, which may be more focused on immediate requirements such as immediate market value or immediate revenue?
Yeah, so TDK is obviously focused on its customers, its quality, delivering what it does well and what it's done well over decades. So to go into a new area that has significant risk, significant technology barriers, is something that they can do in a couple different ways. Of course, they can do that internally, but I think the amount of resources that they might put towards that would be less than a startup does. And as a startup goes in those directions, they certainly put more emphasis on execution, urgency, and ultimately it comes down to risk taking. So that's I think where a startup differentiates itself from a large company.
Both you and your team at Trusted Positioning Inc. have been very proactive in collaborations with TDK Ventures portfolio companies. You worked with Under and now you're working with Faction. Tell us about your experience working with TDK Ventures portfolios, what you see as benefits, what has been aha moments, what has been really pleasurable technological interaction.
Yeah, well, coming from a startup background ourselves and then integrating into a larger company like TDK, we appreciate the ability of these companies to really differentiate and create value. And the two examples you mentioned, both Under and Faction, are actually in a similar value chain, but very different companies and very different deliverables that they provide. In Under's case, they're doing new sensors, new imaging radars, and we're actually integrating their product into ours. With Faction, we're working a little bit more cohesively and collaboratively at the software level, the integrated level for L2, L3 driving. But in general, those aren't the only two companies that we've engaged with TDK Ventures. And in general, it gives us the ability to be aware of what's out there, be exposed to new technology, sometimes getting our feet wet in that technology, but not necessarily, sometimes also seeing what we shouldn't get into. So the two examples you talked about are examples where, of course, we've got deep into in the autonomous driving realm. But there's many other examples where we've been exposed to TDK Ventures companies, and it's actually helped us to focus our roadmaps and our ability to move forward with our own products. Our focus is actually on inertial at the core. That's what we say now. A lot of people might not know what that means. Inertial are motion sensors, to simplify it. And from motion sensors, we can sense relative movement of a person, a vehicle, an object, whatever. Now, that's not really positioning, but it does help positioning because inertial is the only technology that's always on. But then you need to bring in other positioning technologies. Everybody's aware of GPS. But you can also position off of cameras, off of radars, off of LiDARs. Those are perception positioning systems. Then if you go indoors, you can position off of, like I talked about, the signals of opportunity, like electromagnetic signals or wireless signals. And for us, we separate things, of course, from a business into different verticals. So we have a venue product that's more geared towards indoors, and then we have an auto product that is more geared towards autonomy. But the interesting thing that's been happening in the last few years is that all of these positioning, location products, whatever you want to call them, we are kind of in the navigation space where we'd be navigating somebody. We'd be telling somebody on a phone or on a screen in a vehicle, you are here, and then that person is taking action. But what's really changing now is that the positioning is getting so good that now machines can take action and do it themselves. So that's really the difference between navigation and autonomy, especially as we go from legacy products like our navigation products like Track into indoor positioning products like Venue, and then in the future into our autonomous positioning products.
We also visited one other of our portfolio company, Agility Robotics, in Oregon some time ago. That's in a different technology space. Could you tell us how TPI can enable a human bipedal robot?
Yeah, and I would actually argue that the technology space might be very similar to what you could find on self-driving vehicles, whether it's bipedal or quadrupedal or it's wheeled. But the market space, the applications, of course, are completely opposite, completely different. The environments are different, indoor versus outdoor. A lot of the work we're doing with Faction is for outdoor movement of wheeled vehicles, whereas with Agility Robotics, the idea there is humanoid type robots that are moving around in an indoor space like a factory or a warehouse that are taking over mundane jobs by humans and moving things around. But the positioning technology from our side is actually very similar. Some of the technologies, the sensors we use for vehicles, like some of the perception sensors, we can use those sensors as well to position with an indoor environment, although it's more complex. We also use other technologies beyond just perception. Of course, GPS doesn't work indoors, or GNSS. So the replacement to that we use are signals of opportunity, like electromagnetic signals that create patterns within indoors, or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth signals that also create patterns. So from our perspective, that type of indoor bipedal application is a little bit further out, and it's maybe a convergence of a couple of our technologies in the indoor space and the outdoor, but it's certainly coming.
Hello, Vamsi. It's a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thanks, Geeta. I'm Vamshi Gangamala. I'm Marketing Director and Technical Lead for Industrial Business Unit within TDK InvenSense. Been with TDK InvenSense for 11 years. Our claim to fame was that we were the first company to produce a 6-axis motion sensor, which has both a gyroscope and accelerometer in it, and also it kicked off the adoption of IMUs inside phones. Pre-2009, the cell phone just had an accelerometer, never a gyroscope. We kind of kicked that adoption into the mainstream and helping the company go into IPO. Starting my career as a principal engineer, slowly grew up along the ranks, now becoming the technical lead and also the marketing director for the industrial business unit.
Vamsi, you've had discussions with a few more of our portfolio companies, including Agility Robotics.
Vamshi, I'm the director of software systems, focusing on industrial, and I'm purely going to be introducing InvenSense as a whole with all the sensors which it has, and then I'll try to focus more on the IMU and see if there are more interplays for us to potentially get more of this sensor content for us.
Could you explain how InvenSense products can be utilized in a different use case, such as the bipedal robots that they are developing for indoor use?
Agility uses the inertial motion sensors very different from how it's used by Faction for navigation. In Agility's case, they use it for stabilization of the bipedal robot and also to help it coordinate the bipedal motion to get the robot around. They also use the sensors for orientation, measurement of various limbs on the robot to do the predefined action defined for factory automation.
TDK recognized the value in what we were doing earlier than most people could see what was different about what we were doing. We're also talking with TDK about the various types of sensors and things that can be going in the robot. One example of that is we've got now some InvenSense IMUs that are going to be just the chip level, but distributed around the whole robot. It's happening fast, and it's going to accelerate. And robots that are able to do all these useful tasks in our space, it's going to start to be more and more common. It's going to become part of everyday life.